attending the 8th Annual Startup Boston Week. My name is Nazma Rosado, and I will be your host for today. A huge thank you again to Suffolk University's Sawyer Business School for hosting this conference. I mean, how gorgeous is this location? And the views, beautiful. As you may have noticed on your drive-in, as you come into this location, it's the perfect hub for exploring Boston's innovation ecosystem and learning from industry leaders. The goal behind Startup Boston Week, as my Bostonian accent starts to slip through, the goal behind Startup Boston Week is to connect the entire greater Boston and New England startup community, all industries, all startup departments, and all bootstrapped and funding stages for 5 days of learning and connecting with one another. The team that creates Startup Boston Week is primarily volunteer, and the folks you see walking around here today in these green shirts are volunteering their time. So thank you for attending this conference. It is a labor of love, and we appreciate you playing a role in shaping the startup community. Finally, a huge thank you to Nelson Mullins for sponsoring this session. Startup Boston Week could not happen without the support of awesome partners such as them. Thank you so much for attending Startup Boston Week, and now on to the important stuff, on to today's first session. We're going to start off by handing over to Ben Hron, who will cover a wonderful presentation topic of working cost effectively with lawyers. Thanks, everyone, and Ben, please.
Thank you. Okay, I hope you all will applaud at least that much at the end of the program as well. Thank you all very much for coming. My name is Ben Hron. I am a partner in the corporate practice group at Nelson Mullins here in Boston. I'll talk a little bit more about Nelson Mullins later. And I'm part of the firm's venture capital and technologies team, which is a multidisciplinary, multi-geographic team that helps entrepreneurs launch and grow businesses. And I'm here today to talk about working cost effectively with lawyers. And for those of you who have started companies before, you're already familiar with the fact that you're going to end up spending a lot of time talking to your lawyer if your business is successful. And so it's pretty important to understand how to find a good lawyer, to find a lawyer you like working with, and to develop a good relationship. And unfortunately for entrepreneurs, there's a tremendous amount of information out there about starting companies, about finding advisors, about finding investors, about finding co-founders. But there's really very little out there to help you figure out how to find a lawyer that's a good fit for your business. So that's what we're going to focus on. The goal of this presentation is to really give you a better understanding of the dynamics of the attorney-client relationship so that you can have a more productive relationship with your lawyer, which hopefully will lead to facilitating your business's success. So I've been working with startups my whole career. I've been doing this for a little over 20 years. I've advised thousands of entrepreneurs and hundreds of companies from inception to exit. I've also worked at several different law firms, a number of large law firms, as well as co-founding my own, which I ran from 2009 to 2011. These experiences have taught me a lot about the characteristics of a good attorney-client relationship, and also what attorneys and clients can do to make that relationship better. The experience has also taught me a lot about the tensions in an attorney-client relationship and what attorneys and clients sometimes do to make that worse. And so we're going to talk a little bit about a few of those things. One thing about working with lawyers that I've learned drives entrepreneurs nuts is that most advice comes with a disclaimer. Legal advice often sounds something like, if A and B and C are true, then I believe that D is likely. And while it is at times irritating, it drives home one of the fundamental aspects of an attorney-client relationship, which is the attorney advises and the client decides. Okay? I can tell you, you should read the disclaimer so you understand the potential risks of listening to this presentation and then going off and doing something without getting further legal advice. But I can't make you do it, right? Similar, I can advise you on ways in which, on the potential pitfalls of certain courses of action in your business, on what's common, what's market, but I can't make you do it. And again, we'll return to that in a little bit. So we're going to talk about a handful of topics. We're going to talk about some keys to understanding the attorney-client relationship, how to find and retain a lawyer, what that retention agreement looks like, some tips to actually working effectively with lawyers, bills, how do lawyers bill their time or bill their work, and budgeting, how to effectively manage legal bills, changing lawyers, what happens if it just isn't working out and you decide you need to make a change, and then we'll summarize some techniques for controlling costs. So there are 4 key things I think you should understand about an attorney-client relationship in order to get the most out of it. The first is the client is the company, not the individual entrepreneur. And that's something that most of the time when things are going well, doesn't matter, right? Everything's going well, the interests of the entrepreneur, who's usually the CEO or maybe a CFO if there's multiple co-founders, are all aligned. But if things start to go south, if there's some point of conflict between the founders and perhaps the board of directors, including some outside investors, the lawyer's obligation is to the company, and the board controls the company. So you may at times find yourself in a situation where the lawyer has to say to you, I can't help you with that because because there's a conflict between your interests and those of the board. Okay? And you need to separately find your own counsel. The second thing to remember is that nothing prevents a client from changing counsel anytime they want to. This is important for the client, right? You don't want to be stuck in a bad attorney-client relationship. It is a protection, it is ethically obligated. We can't lock clients in. But it also creates some tension in the relationship. One of the risks for the lawyer is that they're going to invest a bunch of time, energy, money, or deferred fees and whatnot into a client relationship, and then the client goes off and finds another lawyer. Not an uncommon scenario is the lawyer meets an entrepreneur early on, which many of you I expect are, and the lawyer will spend time with the client off the clock, not billing time. They may defer fees, they may write fees off. Client goes off, successfully raises capital, and then their investor says to them, you know what, we'd really be more comfortable if you use this other firm over here. Now, there's no return on that investment for the lawyer. They've just lost out on everything that they've written off. So it's important to understand that because you need to understand the perspective of the lawyer that you're working with. While you have an interest in keeping costs as low as possible in the long term, in the short term, until you've raised capital, for the lawyer, that's a potential loss of revenue. And so that tension can come into play when there's disputes about fees or other aspects of the relationship. And so and again, these are things that can be overcome, but what's important is that you try to maintain communication in the relationship to try to develop trust. And that trust is ultimately what helps you get through those sort of tension points. The third thing that's important to understand is that misalignment of economic incentives also applies to the back end of the relationship, right? If your business is successful, you sell your company and you go buy a private island in the Caribbean. If that it happens. If that happens, your lawyer loses a client, right? So again, the lawyer absolutely wants that long-term relationship and wants to be involved and grow with your business as it becomes more successful, but their interests aren't always 100% aligned with your own, right? And that's okay, but it's important for you as the client to go into the relationship understanding that. So when there's tensions in the relationship, you can help to figure out how to resolve them. And you can understand the lawyer's perspective on it as well as they need to understand yours. Finally, as I mentioned a minute ago, lawyers advise clients on risks and benefits of certain courses of action. They don't dictate business decisions. If you're starting a company, it's inherently more risky than something else you could do. You could all go out and find a regular job and have a nice income instead of taking the risk of starting a business, right? You're already doing something much more risky than, say, I am working as a lawyer. So it's not my place to tell you, you can't take this risk. What I will do is tell you, here's the potential consequences if you do, okay? And then you get to decide. A common scenario, a common place where this comes up is hiring. Oftentimes when startups are making their first hires, they want to pay them with equity. And oftentimes the people they're hiring are perfectly happy to be just paid in equity. The problem is there's laws against that. There are minimum wage laws that require that you pay people a minimum wage for hours worked. That law gets violated by every single startup I've ever worked with. Right? Most of the time, it doesn't come back to haunt anybody, but sometimes it does. I had a client many years ago who hired and then quickly fired a handful of people. It was just a mistake. It just didn't work out. Those people went and filed for unemployment. And the Commonwealth of Massachusetts looked in their records. It had no record of this company having paid any sort of unemployment taxes. And so they wrote the company a letter, and that resulted in, as you can imagine, a whole bunch of legal fees around managing the relationship and setting things straight with both the former employee and with the Commonwealth. Okay? So those things do happen. Is the Commonwealth of Massachusetts or any of the other states or the federal government seeking out small companies that are violating wage and hour laws? No, they've got bigger fish to fry. But does it happen on occasion? Yeah. My job is to help you understand those risks so you can make an informed decision. I'm going to pause for just a moment here because I didn't say this at the beginning, but does anybody have questions? Okay, I'm going to just keep rolling along. And if you have questions, raise your hand, all right? So, a takeaway from this, oh, sorry, was there a question?
I was just going to quickly ask, I don't know if you'll cover it later, but are you going to cover like when you need a specialist attorney versus when you work with a generalist?
I will, I certainly can discuss that in the context of what we're going to talk about in a second.
Okay, perfect, thank you.
Sure. So the general takeaway is while there's elements of the attorney-client relationship that can present challenges, those challenges are significantly reduced if there's a relationship of trust between the attorney and the client. Okay? As with just about any other relationship, a key to developing trust is communication, which is what we're going to talk about shortly. So when do you actually need to hire a lawyer? General rule of thumb, anytime that you have business dealings with anybody else, be it a co-founder, a service provider, an investor, or a customer, anytime you have valuable assets to protect. And the third category would be anytime your existing relationship or the relationship with your existing lawyer isn't working out. At the earliest stages, when you're starting a company, there are a lot of services out there that can help you out online. There's LegalZoom, but nowadays there's even more advanced services that will actually help you create companies online with pretty decent documents. My advice to you is that some of the better ones are pretty good, but none of them are going to replace having somebody to talk to about what your business's goals are, what what the expectations are between you and your co-founders, and help you try to work through some of those things. At the end of the day, what the lawyer does is not just filling out blanks and paperwork, right? My job is much more about helping you build a business, but also helping you to take your particular both aspirations and fears and navigating that in a legal structure, putting that into a legal structure. Right? Everybody has a different, sorry, what's the word I'm looking for? Totally lost my train of thought. Everybody has different concerns around starting businesses. There are things that, for some people, keeping control of their business is going to be a particular concern, not wanting somebody to come in and be able to kick them out. For other people, they're less concerned about maintaining control, but they're very concerned about making sure they keep a larger stake in their company in order to be able to get a better exit at the back end, right? My job is to help understand how, or help you translate that into a legal structure that works for you, and also a legal structure that works among the co-founders, right? A common scenario is co-founders that can't agree on equity splits, right? You can plug an equity split into an online program and it will spit out documents, but how do you actually figure out what that split should be? Should it just be equal across the board? What if somebody thinks they should get more? How do you resolve those differences? That's the place where, ideally, the lawyer can come in and really add some value. Of course, finding the right lawyer for your business can be a lot easier said than done. There's no easy way to directly assess the quality of a lawyer's work or compare it to the quality of another lawyer's work. My wife's a doctor. If you go to a doctor and you have a problem, and the doctor says, take 2 of these pills, and the problem goes away, doctor's probably done their job correctly. Probably, right? With a lawyer, if you have them draft a document, you have no idea if that document is any good or not until somebody ends up suing you over it, and you end up in court, and some judge is deciding about whether it really says what you thought it said. Because of that, it's really important when trying to find a lawyer that you rely on some secondary attributes, secondary indicators of value and quality. One of those is referrals. It absolutely helps to go to people who have started companies before, worked with lawyers, and ask them about their experience, good and bad. Which ones worked, which ones didn't, what worked, what didn't, why. Also look at lawyers' specific subject matter expertise. Look at the expertise of the firms they're working with, the number of people they've got working in that area. Look at industry expertise. If you are in a particularly technical industry or an area that has particular regulatory concerns, find out if the firm has those expertise. To the question about specialists later, look into whether or not the firm has the specialists. You don't necessarily have to find all of it on the website, okay? You can ask people about it. find a lawyer to talk to, and then ask them to make introductions to specialists. But go through the process of doing the diligence. You also want to pay attention to things like personal chemistry. This is somebody who you're going to be spending a lot of time talking to. You also want them to be willing to take your calls on the weekends, in the evenings, when it's inconvenient for them because it's important to you, right? And a lot of that comes down to personal chemistry. It comes down to, are they invested in you and your business? Look at rates and fee structures. There's a tremendous amount of variability in legal fees across the industry, locally and nationally. It is something that's underappreciated, and we're going to talk a little bit more about it in a second. And I suggest you sort of try to narrow it down to 2 to 4 lawyers that you want to have a Zoom interview or an in-person interview with. Ask them some questions, have them tell you a little bit about their practice and their firm, and figure out whether you think it might be a good fit. All of the things being equal, you want to try to find a lawyer that you believe you can work with for the long term as the company grows. Don't worry so much about finding the right person for the next 6 months or the perfect person for the next 6 months. Worry about finding somebody who's going to be able to grow with you. That may mean somebody who's at a larger firm that's slightly more expensive now. We'll talk about managing that in a second. But what you don't want to do is use somebody to set up your company that doesn't have the ability to continue to advise you as you go forward. Because the more times you switch, the more costly it is. Fee arrangements at law firms are typically hourly. Right? Most of the time, lawyers bill based on their time. And there's a historical reason for this. It used to be actually way back when that lawyers just handed you a bill and said, you owe me $300 for this. And at some point, clients started saying, well, for what? What did you do? And the lawyers started providing more information. The client says, well, why? How much time did it really take you? So we have evolved to the billable hour, much to the consternation of both lawyers and clients. It's a terrible system, but it seems to be the best one we've figured out so far. With that said, there are scenarios in which lawyers are willing to fix fees or even cap fees. But that always comes with a catch. If you want your lawyer to fix a fee or cap a fee, they have to build in some buffer for the possibility that things go wrong. Right? So the lawyer might expect something will cost $5,000 in fees at their normal hourly rate. But what if you ask for more than they're expecting? What if the other side starts being difficult in negotiations? All of those things can increase the amount of time and therefore increase fees. So instead of capping a fee or fixing a fee at $5,000, they'll fix it or cap it at $7,000 or $8,000. So cap fees and fixed fees will create some certainty for you, but they won't actually necessarily, they'll generally make things more expensive on average, right? And that's a trade-off you may be willing to make, as may the lawyer, but it's something you have to understand that it's not that you're getting a great deal on it, you're just getting more certainty. Entrepreneurs also often ask about discounts and deferrals. Discounts can be limited to a specific project, or they might apply to all legal work for a client, right? It could be specific or broad. Many firms are willing to discount hourly rates for startups for at least some period of time, and they might also do so if the client is willing to pay invoices promptly, right? So I'll give a discount for invoices paid within 30 days. Some firms also offer formal deferrals. We won't charge you anything until you've raised a certain amount of capital or at least 12 months from the date we start. Those types of formal deferrals are great to get. Firms are usually a little cautious about giving them out, but particularly if you can get an introduction from somebody who's known to the firm, an investor or somebody else the firm has a good relationship with, oftentimes those deferrals are something you can get. But here's the secret. Most of the time at firms that do this kind of work, you can get informal deferrals much more easily than you get formal deferrals. By which I mean, I'm not going to chase you down for the money you owe us, right? No lawyer is going to take a startup company to court to collect on $10,000 of legal fees. At least nobody that works in this space. You can't do it. You'd stop being able to work in this space pretty quickly. So while those deferrals, those formal deferrals are enticing, don't assume because you didn't get one that you are going to have to pay net 30 every month, okay? Talk to the lawyer. And again, this is why it's so important to understand who you're working with and develop that relationship. Talk to the lawyer that you want to hire about how they deal with the types of situations. Lawyers in this space should understand that it is commonplace for companies to run into times where they're just not going to be able to pay. They've got vendors to pay in order to keep the site up, right? They've got somebody else that's going to end up being more important to pay than you. It's just the reality of the job, okay? So don't get so hyper-focused on, oh, I got a deferral offer from this firm, this is the firm I'm going to go with. Absent a formal deferral, and leaving aside the informal deferrals, legal fees are generally payable within 30 days. There's always a tremendous amount of flexibility in that, but the more you develop a relationship with a lawyer that you're working with, the more flexibility there's going to be there. Because the lawyer knows that you are going to try to get them paid as soon as possible, they're much more likely to be able to give you that grace, right? The other thing that really helps is a history of paying, right? Even if it's a little bit. If you get a bill for $1,000 and you send in money for $100, you send in $100 and say, I'll pay $100 until I get this paid off, right? That helps. Not just for the lawyer and making sure that the lawyer understands that you value their work, but also with the lawyer's relationship with their firm. Because the lawyer has somebody they have to answer to too, right? The lawyer has a boss who's saying, you've billed all this time, where's the money? Because they're paying me, I've got to figure out some way of generating revenue, right? Where are we going to get, where's this going to go? Where's our return? If you can help your lawyer by giving them something they can point to and say, look, they're working on it, right? We're getting paid a little bit on a monthly basis, and they're going to get it paid off. That will help your lawyer when you really need that extra time to be able to go to the firm and say, look, we're just going to give them a break, and I know we're going to continue to run up some fees because they've got other work coming in, but at the end of the day, we're going to get paid. The relationship itself, the terms of the relationship, are going to be found in an engagement letter that the lawyer is going to give to you that's going to outline the hourly rates, at least the initial hourly rates that you're going to be paying, as well as some other basic blocking and tackling of a legal relationship. Among other things, it'll say you can leave the relationship at any time, and it'll talk about extraneous expenses if the firm's passing through things like copy fees and stuff like that. Legal fees typically increase annually, usually by at least the rate of inflation, sometimes by a little more, okay? you will not necessarily be notified when those rates increase. The first time you'll notice it is probably when you look at a bill and it turns out the hourly rate has gone up. You can absolutely ask about it, but it is not, but what the initial engagement letter will say is our rates change from time to time. Okay? So if it's something you're concerned about, there's no reason you shouldn't be, ask about it. Ask for updates. So who do you actually hire? Well, to help you narrow down the field from, several thousand law firms nationwide to several hundred regionally to several dozen in Boston, here's some data from PitchBook, which is a data aggregator in the startup space. The chart on the left is most active law firms based on the number of financing deals that they were part of in Q2 2024. On the right is the same data for just representing company-side transactions. Just representing companies in financing transactions. So you should see some familiar names on that list. I've worked at a couple of these firms, including Nelson Mullins. And you might notice pretty quickly that there's a big gap in the number of deals from those first few firms down to the rest of the firms. And this is just the top 15, right? There's a whole litany of firms behind that work in this space that aren't even on the top 15. This is, by the way, just Q2 2024. But there's two things that are on this list that are helpful to keep in mind. First, the list shows total deals, not deals per lawyer. So it isn't a proxy for the experience of a particular attorney. Okay? Some of these firms have hundreds of lawyers doing deals. Some of them might have two. So don't assume that just because one firm has done 100 more deals than another firm, that the lawyer you're talking to at that firm is better than another. The second thing is, it doesn't show fees, either for financing or overall. If you do a little research, you'll find that nearly all of the top 15 firms on this list are headquartered out of the Bay Area, the New York area, the Los Angeles area, or the Boston area. This image is from a recent report by Bright Flag on the hourly billing rates of lawyers at the top 100 largest law firms in the United States. It shows the average partner billing rate at firms in 10 major metro areas. Remember the ones I just mentioned? Bay Area, New York, Los Angeles, and Boston. Now, there's a strong correlation between rates and cost of living where the lawyer is located, which is no surprise. But what do the rates in different cities tell you about the quality of the legal work? Anybody? Not much. I can tell you from 20 plus years working at several large law firms, with and opposite from lawyers across the country, that higher fees don't always correlate with better legal services. A high-priced attorney in New York may offer premium services, but a lawyer in Kansas City or Atlanta with a much lower billing rate may provide the same or even better results at a fraction of the cost. To be clear, there are factors other than geography that influence hourly rates, such as specific subject matter expertise. And factors other than hourly rates that you should consider in choosing a lawyer and a firm. But for startups, it's crucial to weigh the costs and the value of the services or against the value of the services and the company's legal needs. So why am I here in Boston talking to you about that? Well, just as it's important to an entrepreneur that they find a lawyer that fits for them, it's important for me as a lawyer that works with startups to be at a firm that caters to startups and that is friendly to startups and has rates that are friendly to startups. And one of the biggest factors in my decision to join Nelson Mullins, which by the way has 1,000 lawyers across 30 offices across the country, is that the firm's rates are much more startup friendly than a lot of the firms that I've worked at before, and certainly a lot of firms in the Boston area. Why is that? Well, because Nelson Mullins is based in South Carolina, and its largest office and most of the people on my team are in Atlanta, Georgia. At the same time, as you saw a second ago, Nelson Mullins is ranked among the most active law firms in the United States for venture capital financing deals. For me, that's a win-win from my standpoint of being able to service my clients. So once you've actually hired your lawyer, the most important thing you can do to maintain a productive working relationship is to keep your lawyer in the loop about developments with your business and your plans for the future. Keeping your lawyer informed will allow them to help facilitate the proper staffing of legal work and avoid potential pitfalls that could end up leading to bigger problems down the road and bigger legal bills. Consider setting up regular check-ins with your lawyer just to catch up on what's going on with your business. This will give them an opportunity to identify potential issues before they become a problem. And oftentimes lawyers will be willing to do that kind of catch-up off the clock, right, at no charge to you, because it's part of developing that relationship. And it's part of making sure that we're doing the right legal work and we're keeping you on the right track. Because ultimately, that's good for me too. The same thing oftentimes goes for attendance at board meetings. As long as the board meetings aren't, 4 hours once a month, oftentimes lawyers will attend board meetings without charging. Because again, it's a way of understanding your business, keeping track of things, maintaining and building a relationship. You should never have to worry about calling your lawyer because of cost. And if you do, probably need to reconsider who you're working with. If I have a client going through a cash crunch, and a lot of them are and have been for the last 2 years, the first thing I'm going to do is more aggressively manage time and manage the fees. Because I know that's what my clients need for them to be successful, and ultimately for me, the value is in the long-term relationship, right? As I said, I've got a firm with 1,000 lawyers. A few $1,000s a month is not going to move the needle, but if you raise capital, if you start growing, if there's eventually an acquisition, those things move the needle over time. So it's in my interest, and it should be in your lawyer's interest too, to see that they're doing what they can to build towards your long-term success. Another thing you can do to help effectively manage outside counsel is to understand how staffing works within a law firm. If you hire a lawyer at a firm, some of the work of your company is going to likely be delegated down to somebody else within the firm. Either somebody more junior because it's more cost effective, or a specialist because you have needs for intellectual property work or tax work or labor and employment work, and I'm not that guy. The decision on how to staff work is generally going to be within the purview of the relationship partner, the person who's your primary contact at the firm. But you can absolutely influence those staffing decisions by indicating a preference or simply stating that you don't want to work with somebody. Right? It happens. It's personal relationship business. I've had clients say to me, I'm just not getting the service I need out of this particular person. Fine. I'll give it to somebody else within the organization. We can make that work. What I can't do is read your mind. I can't assume that, I can't know whether or not you're upset with somebody's work without you telling me. And the worst thing from my perspective, and probably from yours, is to let it go on for a long period of time where you just keep getting more and more unhappy with work. Because then what you're doing is you're looking for another law firm. And that's what I don't want. So if you communicate your concerns, then I can help fix them, which is good for me and good for you. When it comes to day-to-day legal work, there are a number of things that, oh, actually, let me just stop for 1 second here. You asked a question about specialists. Did I answer it, or you still have, is there something more specific? You want to know what happens when you need a specialist? Yeah. Okay. When you need a specialist, the first thing generally you would do is you would talk to the lawyer within the firm that you have a relationship with. They may or may not have that expertise, right? If it's highly specific, like some very particular area of biotech, right? Then you're going to want to find a patent lawyer, for example, that has relatively close expertise. Maybe not something exactly on point because it's maybe cutting edge, but something close enough that they understand what the technology is, right? They can do the patents. If they have it within the firm, generally speaking, my suggestion is that's your best bet, right? That's the first place you want to go. But it's not the only place you can go. You know, I work with lawyers at other firms all the time where we're corporate counsel and somebody else does the IP work, for example, right? It absolutely happens. Some other firm might do the regulatory work. Even if we have it internally, it sometimes happens. And so there's nothing wrong with that. It's similar to the process of evaluating a lawyer for the first time. You're just trying to figure out whether or not it's the right fit. Fair? Okay. Anybody else have questions so far? Yeah. Sorry, just wait for the mic. Thanks.
So I see at the bottom here, you have a pro tip. You may be able to reduce legal fees by borrowing documents from competitors that are publicly available and handling administrative tasks internally. So can you give me some websites, I guess? I don't really understand what, you know, where you would find these documents.
Yeah, so there's, first of all, I'm not suggesting it is a great place to go if you aren't familiar with these types of things already. But for example, if you're starting a website and you are a competitor to some existing business that's more established, that company probably has a privacy policy in terms of service on their website, right? That may be a perfectly reasonable starting point for your terms of service and privacy policy. I'm not suggesting you just copy and paste it because your business is going to be different from theirs. But can you do a little research? Could you, for example, go to your lawyer and say, look, I've already found these 3 businesses that are in my space and have similar business models. This might be a good place to start. Does that save that lawyer half an hour to an hour of time going around and trying to find a good model for your terms of service and privacy policy? Yeah, it does. There's also, if you want to get more into it, there are publicly available documents on the SEC's website. If you can find companies that are in your space, you can sometimes find contracts that the publicly traded companies have published that might be a good starting point. Again, not advising it for everybody, but it is absolutely something that can be done and sometimes can be valuable. Was there another question in the back?
Hello, Roger Gomez. So I have a question about the intellectual property. My question is, when is the right moment to register a mobile application, in which stage? And also what happened when we have other versions of this application, more functionalities, the normal evolution of on
Sorry,
a
what
mobile
kind of application?
mobile app.
When do you release the mobile application?
No, the application is in development,
Yeah.
approximately less than 90%. But when is the precise or the right moment to work in intellectual property register? And what happened? The second question is, what happened with the evolution when we have more releases
Yeah,
of this app?
I'll say one thing, but first of all, I'm not an intellectual property lawyer. So to some degree, that's something you should work out with an intellectual property lawyer. But I can tell you that for the most part, there's very little intellectual property protected around websites or mobile apps, because most of the time patenting it doesn't make any sense because it's too easy to replicate in some other form. So it's generally, the release dates generally are not driven by legal concerns. They're driven by business ones. Was there a question back there? You still?
Thanks. You mentioned engaging an attorney in Kansas City. Would they have the ability to practice law here, or how does that work?
No, but 99-something% of startups, well, that's probably, I'm making that number up. A large number of startups are formed in Delaware. And every corporate lawyer in the country is familiar with Delaware law, even if they don't if they're not technically admitted there. And frankly, a tremendous amount of what I do on a day-to-day basis is contract-driven, not statutory-driven, right? We're just writing agreements. So the lawyer in Kansas City will be just fine. With the lawyer in Kansas City, my biggest concern would not be whether or not they can practice Delaware law. It's, do they have the experience in the startup space, right? That's the other factor.
Thank you. Recently, we've seen in some of our contracts choice of law being state of Florida. I've never seen that before. Why are they choosing state of Florida?
I don't know. That's an interesting question. Is it intellectual property related?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Service provider to institutional B2B service provision, online tech support.
Yeah, I'm sure there's, oftentimes what happens is certain state laws come into place. So for example, Texas is a common jurisdiction for a lot of things around patents, because Texas has a particularly well-developed body of case law around intellectual property. New York is used for a lot of commerce. I'm not quite sure why Florida is showing up in your contracts, but it's probably something that DeSantis passed in the last few years. It's my guess. Do you mind if I just hold those for them, because we're getting a little short on time. I want to make sure we can keep moving through the rest of it, and I'll be around at the end. Okay, so managing day-to-day legal work. When it comes to day-to-day legal work, there are a number of things you can do to help control costs. We've already talked about the idea of trying to find other resources to help your lawyers save time. Work with your lawyer to determine which work needs to be done now and what can be pushed off until later on, right? Help to prioritize it, because by prioritizing the work, you can also help to spread out the legal fees over time. Convey your expectations for timing and deliverables. Make sure your lawyer understands if you want a more detailed memo on something or if you just want a bullet point email. Don't assume your lawyer is going to give you exactly what you want. What you don't want is them delivering you a 10-page legal memo when all you really wanted was 3 bullet points that would have sufficed, right? Because they're going to bill you for it, and then they're going to be upset that you're going to be upset, and they're going to be upset at the same time. It's a bad situation. Avoid unnecessary rush projects and don't set artificial deadlines. Try to get your lawyer in the loop as much as possible early on. Even if there's no immediate legal work to do, tell them what's coming down the pike. It'll help them prepare, it'll help them staff things, right? And try to avoid emergencies, because in emergencies, all bets are off. If you call me up on a Friday and you say, I have to have this in the next 24 hours, then I'm doing the work, most likely. And I'm doing it at my rate, and it's whatever, it takes as much time as it takes, and it costs what it costs, right? I can't delegate that work to somebody. I can't find the right person for it. Or if I do, it's still going to be, it's most likely going to be the partner and not somebody else at a lower billing rate, right? So try to avoid those emergencies as much as possible. The process for legal billing, pretty straightforward. You'll get a bill from your lawyer every month. But before you receive that bill, the partner in charge has already gone through it. And they've likely gone through it entry by entry. They may have followed up with various people that have billed time to the matter and asked them either to review it or what they were doing or why it took so much time. They may have reduced the amount of time already before you even see it. So you might get a bill for $1,000, but the bill might have, the actual amount billed or fees charged might have been $2,000, right? You won't necessarily know that. Sometimes the lawyer will tell you how much they're writing off, sometimes they won't. Why? Well, it's an optics thing, it's an internal and external politics thing. There's all sorts of reasons. At the end of the day, what you should care about is what's the amount you actually have to pay, right? But if you have concerns that the billing is too heavy or it's inappropriate or it's just not what you expected, by all means, please call your lawyer, discuss it, tell them there's a problem. I want those phone calls, not because I enjoy them, but because it tells me that we have a relationship where you can talk to me, right? I may say to you, look, this is reasonable for what it was. I may say to you, we talked about this beforehand, and it's what I told you to expect. But what I can't do is reach into your pocket and take out the money, right? I can't do that. So from my perspective, I have to figure out some way of working with you on it. And it may be I say, look, don't, just pay it as we go. Pay some now, pay some later. And if it's something where I agree, look, the fee's unreasonable, or it's too much, or, it's not fair, it wasn't what you expected, I may not be able to discount this bill because there may be, as I talked about earlier, political reasons internally where that's difficult for me. But I may be able to tell you, you know what? I'll give you a 10% discount on the work going forward up to a certain dollar amount so that you're making it back, right? Again, the value of the long-term relationship and where that really comes into play. Legal fees typically increase significantly as your business grows. Initial organization costs around $5,000, ballpark. Ongoing legal needs before your first round of capital. I tell people to budget $2,000 to $3,000 a month. Some months it'll be zero. Some months it might be higher. It's going to just depend on what's going on. But if you budget at that rate, you're probably going to be okay. After you've raised capital, expect those amounts to increase because you're simply going to be doing more work. You're going to have more, you're going to be hiring people, you're going to be issuing option grants, you're going to be doing more customer contracts, hopefully, doing more agreements with vendors. There's just going to be more work. So budget accordingly. One of the things that drives me nuts is seeing presentations, investor presentations from founders where the pro forma financials show constant legal fees as the company grows from 5 people to 50 people and then beyond. It's not going to happen. The legal fees are going to increase. Budget accordingly. It will make you, among other things, it will make you look better in front of the investors, that you actually are thinking about what it's going to cost as you grow. For financings, some ballpark rates on financings. Keep in mind that in priced rounds, and even in some earlier stage rounds, legal fees for the lead investor are typically paid by the company. The legal fees for the Investors Council and the Company Council tend to be similar in a software context. In a life sciences context, it's a little different because you get a lot more due diligence on the earlier stages for biotech companies, because you have to figure out whether the science actually works, right? So those fees on the investor side can be considerably higher. But this gives you a rough sense of what the numbers are going to be. Inevitably, even if everything is going well, there may come a point where the relationship just isn't working out, and you feel the need to make a change. This can happen for all sorts of reasons. Loss of trust for whatever reason. That may be because the attorney's being unresponsive. Oftentimes what happens is you develop a relationship with one lawyer and it turns out you're spending most of your time with another lawyer, and that just isn't working out. Sometimes it's just economics. The fees are too high, there's a dispute over the fees, whatever it might be. If it happens, find another lawyer if you have to. The first course of action should absolutely be to try to have that conversation with your lawyer. Try to figure out if there's some way of salvaging it. But if there isn't, go find another lawyer. There's a lot of us out there. We look a lot like me, sport coat. You can tell us all we're wearing sport coats or suits or something like that. My both ask and suggestion is that you do it respectfully. Don't ghost people, please. And I don't mean that just because it is really painful to just have somebody disappear on you and then to find out 5 months later they raised capital using some other lawyer. That stings. I've had it happen. But it's also because it's a small community, right? Within Boston, but even abroad, or even beyond Boston, it's a small community, and people talk, and reputations travel. So it costs you nothing other than a slightly awkward phone call to call your lawyer up and say, you know what, I'm sorry, we haven't been able to work this out. I've decided to send our work somewhere else. Hopefully the lawyer will be understanding and respectful. They will likely be a little hurt by it. That's okay. My guess is that everybody here has been in breakups before. It's just like that, okay? It's fine, we all move on. Once you get past that point, the process from your standpoint should actually be pretty easy, because your new firm should handle the transfer of files. Your new firm sends a letter to you to sign that just says, I'm transferring my legal work to new firm. The new firm sends the letter over to the old firm's back office handles the transfer of the files, you don't have to do anything. Okay, so it should be pretty seamless. In terms of the money you owe to the old firm, again, I've never seen a law firm certainly chase a startup company for fees they were owed. But again, reputation and relationships matter. So while I would not say you have to send over immediately payment to the firm, even though they will ask you for it, I do recommend you try to make good on those debts eventually if you're able to, right? If you sell the company for $1 billion, pay the firm the $25,000 you owe them, right? It's good business. It's good relationships. All right. Here's the basic 12 bullet points on some of which I've already covered on how to work with lawyers cost effectively. The general takeaway is don't treat finding a lawyer for your company as a transaction. Treat it as a relationship. Relationships require time to develop, they require communication, and they require trust. And if you can establish those things, and it's a two-way street, you have to find somebody that is willing to do that for you too. But if you can establish those things, you'll be able to develop a successful working relationship with your attorney. All right, and before I get to questions, if you're here or watching this live, 2 offers for Start Boston Week attendees. One is we're going to raffle off 10 hours of free legal services, mine legal services. So if you want to do that, check out our page on the Start Boston website and submit a request there. We'll ask you for some information. I think we're asking people to submit decks or some sort of information about the business. And then term sheet reviews. If anytime before the end of this year, you have a term sheet from an investor that you'd like a second opinion on, let me know. I will take a look at it. I'll give you my thoughts on it, and I'll spend an hour on the phone talking to you about it at no charge. And if you end up engaging us for it, I won't bill you anything until the deal closes. Okay. And if we're out of time, I am absolutely available to stick around afterwards for anybody that has questions. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. So that was great. I can't imagine anyone ghosting you. That was really a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much. So before I wrap up the session, are there any questions from folks online? No. Fantastic. And Ben graciously just mentioned that he'll be sticking around for those of you in the room who have questions. So thanks everyone for joining us for this session.
Just one thing. Will my colleagues in the room please raise their hands? I see at least 3 of you. Okay.
Ooh, lots of lawyers around, guys.
So they're available too.
Okay, so I just wanted to remind you guys, there's a welcome party this evening, so stick around. For those of you who are staying in this room for the next session, that session will be at 3:45. It's Home Field Advantage, how to perform a true competitive analysis regularly. If that's not where you want to be, stop by and talk to one of the volunteers out front or at registration. They'll help direct you where you need to be. For those of you who are watching us virtually, you don't need to go anywhere. You can stay just right where you are, and we'll bring the next session to you. Finally, I also wanted to remind you guys to find Kevin Tai. He is here from 3 Circles Studio. He's taking headshots for free, which is a major win. He's also circulating around and taking photos of the sessions and attendees. You can stop by and get a headshot taken with him between 9 and 11 any day this week. All right, so stay in this room if you are hoping to join us for Home Field Advantage. And if not, I wish you guys a great rest of the day, and I will see you all tonight at the welcome reception. Thank you. Thank you. I hate it when I have a script.
Great job as usual. Good seeing you.
Good to see you too. You can go on through?
Yeah. Grab coffee or something. Let's go.
Thank you so much. Fantastic talk. I wanted to ask you a question, just a quick follow-up. You notice like maybe the interest in like Delaware Corporation, like we is like this whole Moss support thing, like it's like might be changing a little bit. Nope. Not being as supportive as the sort of founders as it used to be. Nope. Is it still the same thing?
I mean, Elon Musk is an outlier, and it's also a public company. You know, so it's like it's not the reason that everybody's in Delaware is because if you're raising capital from all over, from investors all over the country, or even raising locally, those investors are investing in companies all over the country. They don't want to have to keep track of laws in 50 different states, and Delaware has just developed into the default state for law, and so it's not that there might not be some reason in the future for you to be a Texas company or something else,